September 18th, 2019. The sun hadn't fully burned through the Kansas morning haze when Elias Turner pulled his rusted 1987 Ford pickup into the gravel lot of Cole Agricultural Equipment just outside Hutchinson. The place was loud already. New tractors lined up like soldiers, gleaming red Case IH machines, polished so clean they reflected the sky. Salesmen in pressed shirts moved quickly, coffee in hand. Voices sharp, confident. It was the kind of place where everything looked expensive, and everything felt like it belonged to someone else. Elias didn't belong there. His truck engine coughed once before dying. He sat there for a moment, hands resting on the wheel, eyes scanning the machines. Then he reached over, picked up a small, grease-stained metal housing wrapped in an old cloth, and stepped out. What happened next would be talked about in that county for years, but not for the reason anyone expected. Inside the service bay, the air smelled of oil and new rubber. A young mechanic glanced up as Elias walked in, then looked back down. Just as quickly dismissive, uninterested. Elias didn't say anything at first. He waited. He always waited. After a moment, a voice came from deeper inside. "Can I help you, sir?" The man who stepped forward was in his early 30s. Clean haircut, crisp shirt with the Case IH logo stitched on the chest. Confident posture. This was Brandon Cole, the owner's son, and the man now running the dealership. Elias set the wrapped piece on the counter and slowly unfolded the cloth. It was an old transmission housing. Heavy cast iron, worn smooth in places from decades of use. Brandon stared at it for about 2 seconds before letting out a short laugh. "You serious?" Elias didn't react. "I was told you might be able to machine this," Elias said quietly. His voice was low, steady. "Just needs a clean on the inner sleeve. Bearings won't sit right anymore." Bearings. Brandon didn't touch the part. He didn't even lean in. Instead, he crossed his arms and smiled. Not the kind of smile that welcomes you, but the kind that closes a door. "Sir, we don't work on antiques." A couple of mechanics nearby chuckled under their breath. Elias nodded once like he'd expected that answer. "It's not an antique. Still runs." That got a louder laugh. Brandon shook his head. "No, I mean it. We don't fix this kind of thing anymore. You'd spend more repairing it than just buying something new." "I'm not looking to buy," Elias said. "Well, that's your first mistake," Brandon replied, his tone sharpening. "You're out here trying to keep junk alive when the rest of the world moved on." 20 years ago, one of the customers leaning against a brand new combine joined in. "Probably still plowing with horses too," he muttered. More laughter. Elias stood there still as a fence post. Brandon leaned forward slightly now, voice louder, making sure others could hear. "Listen, I'll be honest with you. Machines like this, they're done. Dead weight. You bring that thing into a modern field, it won't last a day." Elias finally looked up, meeting Brandon's eyes. "It's lasted 50, he said. "That only made it worse." Brandon laughed again, shaking his head. "Yeah. Well, maybe it's time it didn't." Then came the line no one forgot. "Don't come back here again," Brandon said. His voice cold now. "We don't fix relics, and we don't need customers who refuse to move forward." Silence followed for half a second. Then the quiet snickering returned. Elias looked down at the part. Carefully, he wrapped it back in the cloth. His hands were slow, deliberate, not embarrassed, not rushed, just finished. He picked it up, turned, and began walking toward the door. No anger, no argument. That's what made it uncomfortable. But just before he reached the exit, someone spoke. "Mind if I take a look at that?" The voice came from a man standing near the far wall. Older, late 70s maybe. Worn denim jacket. Hands that looked like they'd spent a lifetime around steel. Elias paused. For a moment he considered saying no, but something in the man's tone, quiet, certain, made him turn back. He walked over and handed him the part without a word. The old man didn't rush. He turned it over slowly. Fingers tracing the edges, the bolt patterns, the wear marks. And then, something changed in his expression. Not amusement, Not pity, recognition. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered. Brandon rolled his eyes. Frank, don't tell me you're going to encourage this. But Frank didn't look at him. Instead, he looked at Elias. Where'd you get this? He asked softly. Elias hesitated, then answered simply, my father. Frank nodded slowly, like that confirmed something he already suspected. For a moment, the noise of the shop seemed to fade. Then Frank did something no one expected. He extended his hand. Name's Frank Delaney. Elias shifted the part to one arm and shook his hand. Elias Turner. It was just a handshake. Simple. Quiet. Easy to miss. But that handshake would go on to save 3 farms, and not a single person in that room understood why. Not yet, because this story was never really about a broken machine. It was about something buried far deeper. And to understand it, you have to go back, long before that morning, back to a stretch of land just outside Kingman County, where the soil ran dark and deep, and the wind carried stories if you knew how to listen. Elias Turner was born in 1958, in a house that leaned slightly to the east because his father never bothered fixing the foundation. Still stands, doesn't it? His father used to say. That was the kind of man Harold Turner was. He didn't believe in replacing things. He believed in understanding them. Harold had come back from the tail end of the Korean War with a limp in his left leg and a skill set nobody around him quite matched. He could take apart an engine down to its bones and put it back together better than it came from the factory. Not faster, not cleaner, better. He used to say factories build machines for everyone, but a man who knows one machine well enough, he builds it for himself. Elias grew up in that shadow, not in a bad way, in a quiet way. While other boys were playing ball in the fields, Elias was in the barn, sitting on an overturned bucket, watching his father work, watching the way he listened to engines, the way he'd pause mid-turn, tilt his head slightly, like he was hearing something no one else could. Every machine talks, Harold told him once. You just gotta shut up long enough to hear it. Elias never forgot that. By the time he was 12, he could tear down a carburetor blindfolded. By 15, he was fixing neighbors' equipment. By 20, he knew their old case tractor, an aging 1970s model. Most folks had long since scrapped better than anyone alive. But there was something about that tractor, something Harold never fully explained. Late at night, when the barn was quiet and the work was done, Elias would sometimes catch his father, not fixing the machine, but studying it, adjusting things that didn't seem broken, replacing parts that didn't need replacing. Once Elias asked him why. Harold didn't answer right away. He just wiped his hands on a rag, leaned against the tire, and said, "Because this one's different." Different how? Harold never said. But he worked on it more than any other machine they owned. And when Elias turned 23, Harold handed him the keys. "Take care of it," he said. That was all. No speech, no explanation, just those words. A year later, Harold Turner passed away. And that tractor became more than just a machine, short. It became the last thing Elias had that still spoke in his father's voice. Years went by. Farms around them got bigger, louder, faster. Neighbors sold off land, upgraded equipment, took on loans. Elias didn't. He stayed on the same acreage, worked the same soil, drove the same machine. People noticed. They always do. At first they respected it. Then they questioned it. Eventually, they laughed at it. He's stuck in the past. He doesn't understand modern farming. He's too stubborn to move forward. Elias heard all of it and said nothing, because there was something nobody knew, something hidden. Not just in the machine, but in the years his father spent shaping it. Something that didn't show itself in good conditions. Something that only mattered when everything else failed. And that moment was coming. By the spring of 2020, the land around Kingman County didn't look the way it used to. Fields that had once been worked by families, names people remembered, were now stitched together into larger operations. Bigger machines, bigger loans, bigger risks. And right at the center of that shift was Brandon Cole. He had taken over this dealership fully after his father retired, and he wasn't interested in the past. He pushed financing hard, encouraged upgrades, talked farmers into trading in reliable equipment for newer, more powerful machines. Efficiency, he called it. future-proofing, and people listened. Because Brandon didn't just sell machines, he sold confidence. He'd stand in front of a group of farmers, pointing at a brand-new Case IH Magnum, talking about horsepower and torque curves about G. Assisted precision, about how these machines could do in a day, what older tractors struggled to do in 3. And maybe he wasn't wrong, but there was something else in the air, something quieter. Debt. 3 farms sat along the western stretch of Elias's land, owned by the Whitaker brothers, old man Glenn Harper, and a younger couple. Tom and Lisa Redding. Good people, hard workers, but they had listened, they had signed the papers, upgraded everything, and now they owed more than their land had ever been worth. Elias watched it happen. Turned the way he watched most things, without comment, but he noticed the small details others didn't. The way the Whitakers started working later into the night, the way Glenn Harper stopped fixing his fences properly, the way Tom Redding stood longer at the edge of his field, staring, not at the crops, but at the sky. And once late one evening, Tom drove over to Elias's place, didn't even get out of the truck right away, just sat there. Finally, he said, "You ever think about upgrading?" Elias shook his head. Tom gave a tired laugh. "Yeah, me neither. Not anymore." That was the first crack, but it wasn't the one that broke everything, because a month later, the rains came. Not the kind farmers pray for, the kind they fear. It started slow just enough to soften the ground. Then it didn't stop. For 6 days straight, the sky stayed low and heavy, dumping water into fields already planted, already committed. By the time the clouds finally moved on, the land had changed. What had been firm soil turned into something else entirely. Thick, heavy, unforgiving. The kind of ground that doesn't let go once it grabs hold. And that's when the real problem began. Because planting season doesn't wait. Harvest schedules don't care about the weather. And loans? Definitely don't. The Whitakers were first. They rolled their new machine out into the field. Massive tires, powerful engine. Everything Brandon had promised. It made it about 50 yards. Then the rear axle sank. Not all at once. Slow, like the earth was deciding. By the time they realized what was happening, it was already too late. They tried to power through. That only made it worse. The wheels dug deeper. The machine leaned. And then it stopped. Dead. Stuck. They called Brandon. Of course they did. Within hours, he showed up with a service truck and another machine, bigger, stronger, more expensive. He stepped out confident, like this was just another problem to solve. "Don't worry," he told them. "We'll pull it out, But when the second machine tried, it sank too. That's the part nobody talks about when things are going well. Power doesn't matter if the ground won't hold you. News spread fast. By the next day, Glenn Harper had the same issue. Then the Reddings, 3 farms, 3 machines, all stuck, all useless. And every hour they sat there, the situation got worse, because what they found later would change everything. The weight that made those machines so powerful on dry land was exactly what doomed them now. Too heavy, too rigid, too dependent on conditions being perfect. And out here, conditions were never perfect. By the 3rd day, people started gathering, not just neighbors, other farmers, curious onlookers, even a few from town. There's something about failure that draws a crowd. Brandon was still there, coordinating, pacing, making calls, but the confidence in his voice had started to crack. He brought in another machine, different model, same result. It sank before it could even get close enough to help, and that's when someone said it. Quietly at first. "Maybe we should call Elias." There was a pause, then a few chuckles. Brandon overheard. He turned, shaking his head. "You're kidding, right? That old tractor of his wouldn't last 5 minutes out here." No one argued, not out loud, but the idea didn't go away, because there was something about Elias people couldn't quite dismiss. Not anymore. And deep down, they all knew it. But this story wasn't really about who had the biggest machine. It was about who understood the land. And Elias Turner had been listening to that land his entire life. Late that afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the field sat quiet under their weight of mud and silence, a familiar sound echoed from the road. Not loud, not impressive, but steady, consistent, a low rhythmic engine note that didn't strain, didn't rush, didn't try to prove anything. Heads turned, slowly, because they all recognized it, even if they hadn't heard it in years. Elias's tractor came into view, rolling down the dirt path like it belonged there, because it did. And what happened next was the part nobody forgot. The engine didn't roar. It didn't scream like the modern machines had. It just worked. Elias guided the old case tractor slowly off the dirt path and toward the first stuck machine. The Whitaker's unit, half sunk in its rear wheels, swallowed deep in dark mud. People stepped aside without being told. Not out of respect. Not yet. Out of curiosity. Brandon folded his arms as Elias approached, a faint smirk still clinging to his face. This should be good. He muttered to no one in particular. Elias didn't respond. He never did. He stopped a few yards short of the stuck machine and just sat there, engine idling, eyes scanning, listening, because there was something nobody understood about that moment. Elias wasn't looking at the tractor. He was reading the ground, the way the mud had settled, the way the water pooled along the low edges, the slight tilt of the machine, the direction the tires had spun before they gave up. All of it told a story, and Elias was one of the few men left who could still hear it. He shifted the tractor into a lower gear, not the lowest, just enough. Then he climbed down, walked slowly around the Whitaker's machine, ran his hand along the frame, then crouched near the rear axle, pressing his fingers into the mud, testing it, feeling its weight. Someone in the crowd whispered, "What's he doing?" Another replied, "Wasting time." But an older voice, Frank's voice, cut through quietly. "No, he's figuring out how not to make it worse." Elias stood up again, walked back to his tractor, reached behind the seat, and pulled out a heavy chain, old, thick, worn from years of use. Not new, not polished, but strong. He hooked it carefully, not where the others had tried, not to the obvious towing point, but lower, closer to the machine's center of weight. That was the first thing. The second thing, nobody saw. Not clearly, but Frank did, because as Elias climbed back into the seat, he reached down just for a second and adjusted something near the transmission housing, something that didn't exist on standard models, something his father had put there decades ago. Frank's eyes narrowed, and that's when he knew. That old man, Frank whispered under his breath. "You didn't just fix that tractor. You rebuilt it." Elias eased forward. No sudden movement, no surge of power, just a slow, steady pull. At first, nothing happened. The chain tightened. The mud held. A few people chuckled again. Brandon shook his head. "Told you." But then, something shifted. Not the machine. The ground. The old case tractor didn't fight the mud. It worked with it. Its weight lighter, more balanced, spread differently. Its tires didn't dig down. They gripped across. And the torque. It came in low, deep, consistent, not explosive like the modern engines, but relentless, like something that didn't care how long it took. The Whitaker's machine groaned, just slightly. Then, a small movement, barely noticeable, but Elias felt it, and he didn't push harder. He adjusted, just a touch, changed the angle, let the machine breathe, and then it came free. Not dramatically, not with a jerk, but slowly, rising, inch by inch, until the rear wheels broke the suction of the mud. The crowd went quiet. No cheering, not yet. Just silence, because they hadn't expected that. Elias didn't stop. He kept moving, pulled the machine clear, then parked it on firmer ground. Engine said still calm, still steady. He shut it off, climbed down, and began unhooking the chain, like it was just another day. That's when the murmuring started, low at first, then louder. What the hell? How did he? That shouldn't be possible. Brandon stepped forward now, his expression no longer confident. "That was luck," he said quickly. The ground must have shifted. No one answered him, because they were all looking at Elias. And Elias had already started walking toward the next field. Glenn Harper's machine, still stuck, still sinking. The crowd followed. This time no one laughed. No one made jokes, because what they found next changed everything. The second pull was harder. The machine was deeper. The mud thicker. Even Elias paused longer this time, studying, listening, and for a moment, just a moment, there was doubt in the air again. But Elias didn't rush. He adjusted the chain again, changed the angle even more, then climbed back into the seat. Frank stepped closer to Brandon. "You see it yet?" he asked. Brandon frowned. "See what?" "That ain't just an old tractor," Frank said. "That's a machine built for this kind of ground." Brandon scoffed. "Every machine's built for something." Frank shook his head slowly. "No, not like that one." Elias engaged the engine again. This time the sound changed slightly, deeper, like something inside had been unlocked, because there was a detail no one else knew. Inside that transmission housing was a modified gear ratio, not standard, not factory. It allowed the tractor to deliver torque in a way modern machines couldn't replicate. Lower, slower, but stronger. Where it mattered most. Harold Turner hadn't built it for speed. He had built it for survival. The chain tightened again. The mud resisted, but Elias didn't fight it. He waited, let the machine find its rhythm, and then it moved, slower than before, harder, but it moved. And when Glenn Harper's machine finally broke free, the silence shattered. People started talking all at once, voices rising, questions flying, but Elias didn't stay. He didn't wait for praise, because there was still one more field, one more machine. The Reddings, and theirs was the worst, half submerged, tilted, dangerous. Brandon followed now, no longer leading, no longer in control. "Listen," he called out. "You don't have to do this. That machine's not worth the risk." Elias stopped for the first time, turned, looked at him, not angry, not proud, just steady. "It's not the machine," Elias said. And for a second, Brandon didn't understand, but the others did, because they knew what was at stake. A farm, a family, a future. Elias turned back, walked toward the Reddings field, and what happened there was the moment everything changed. The mud was deeper here, water pooled in long, dark stretches. The stuck tractor leaned at an angle that made recovery dangerous. Even standing near it felt unstable. Elias didn't go straight in. He circled, wider this time, testing the edges, looking for something, a path, a weakness, a way in. And then he found it. A narrow line of firmer ground barely visible. Anyone else would have missed it, but Elias didn't. He lined up his tractor, adjusted the chain one last time, and before he climbed back into the seat, Frank stepped forward. "You know what that is, don't you?" Frank said to the crowd. No one answered. Frank nodded toward Elias. "That tractor, it's a prototype." The words hung in the air. Back in the early 70s, Frank continued Hayes experimented with low-gear, high-torque systems for wet terrain. Never went into full production. Too slow for the market. He paused, but a few units made it out. Brandon stared. "That's not possible." Frank looked at him. "It is. If someone knew what they had and made it better." All eyes turned to Elias, who was already climbing into the seat. He didn't confirm it, didn't deny it. He just started the engine. And in that moment, everything people thought they knew shifted. The final pull began. Slow, careful, precise. The tractor moved along the narrow path like it had been there 1,000 times. The chain tightened. The Reddings machine groaned. The mud fought back harder than before. For a moment, it looked like it might fail, like even Elias couldn't beat this. And then, the old case dug in, not down, forward, its tires gripping. Just enough. Its engine delivering that same, a deep, relentless torque. And inch by inch, the machine came free, tilting back, rising, breaking the hold of the mud that had swallowed everything else. When it finally rolled onto solid ground, the crowd erupted. Not polite applause, not quiet murmurs, but full, raw, uncontrolled noise, because they had just seen something they couldn't explain, something they couldn't buy, something they had been laughing at. Just days before, Brandon didn't clap. He just stood there, silent, watching, as Elias shut off the engine one last time, climbed down, and began unhooking the chain, like it had never been a question, like it had always been this way. 3 farms, saved. Not by the newest machine, not by the most expensive solution, but by a man who never stopped listening, and a machine that was never as simple as it looked. But the story didn't end there, because what happened after that day changed more than just those fields. It changed people in ways they didn't expect, and in ways they couldn't undo.